Great. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate the Chamber's hosting this event and for all of you taking time out of your day today to be here. It's a privilege to have an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about some of the important issues that are facing Kansas. You know, when I think about my 8 years in the legislature and what I've learned over that time, I'm kind of reminded of a story that a buddy of mine when I was in the JAG Corps told. He began before he was an officer as an enlisted man, and when he was a young soldier, he was stationed at Fort Knox in Kentucky. And he and another private were assigned to paint some lines on a blacktop. And they were given relatively limited supervision to perform this task on one hot summer day, and so they were out doing their work, and a small mishap occurred, and a bucket of paint was tipped over. And so here were these two young soldiers terrified about what the consequences were going to be when no way to clean this mess up. And so the best idea they could think of at the time was to paint that paint that had spilled into a circle there on the blacktop. At least it would look symmetrical and maybe they'd get in a little bit less trouble. So they did that, and amazingly to them, nobody ever made mention of the circle. They got off scot-free. Well, years went by. My friend got out of the military, went to college on an ROTC scholarship, wound up in the JAG Corps, and then we're serving at Fort Leavenworth together. And the way the story concludes is that many, many years later, he was on a temporary duty assignment as an officer now to Fort Knox. And so he was going around to some of his old stomping grounds and went to the area where he and his cohort had been painting the blacktop that day. And when they arrived, not only was that circle still there, but it was clear that that circle had been freshly painted. Now, the moral of the story is that oftentimes in big organizations and sometimes in small organizations, we do the same thing over and over again without asking the question, why was that circle there in the first place? Does it serve any purpose? And why do we keep painting it year after year? And in many cases, over the past 8 years in my service in the Kansas legislature, it struck me that in a whole host of areas, Kansas government has been painting the same circle over and over again without asking fundamental questions about why we do the things we do as a first question, and secondly, why we do them in the way that we do them. And one of the things I'm really grateful for with respect to the leadership of Governor Brownback, and I may not agree with him on every single issue, but the reality is that he has begun to ask some questions about painting the circle, so to speak, in areas like capers, like education reform, like taxes, like the budget process, like water rights, and a whole host of other areas. We now have leadership at the top that is asking questions about why we're doing things the way that we're doing them in Kansas, and I think is setting a roadmap, to steal from the governor's past campaign, that helps us to sort through some of the really big issues that are facing Kansas going forward. The reality is that Representative Worley and I maybe have some differences of opinion on the direction we should go with respect to some of those issues, and maybe some of those will be elucidated a little bit here today as we move through the process. What I'd like to share primarily is that I think when we look at the future of Kansas and right-sizing government, making sure we have government that's able to perform the core services that it needs to perform, but doing it as efficiently as possible, there are several core policy areas that we have to look at. And right now, I really firmly believe that we have the leadership at the top in Governor Brownback to be able to move forward effectively on budgetary issues, on tax policy, capers reform, and perhaps one of the most important of all, obviously, K-12 education reform, in a way that will really be transformative in terms of making Kansas the best possible place to live, to work, to raise a family. And so, I've been a Johnson County resident since I was in going into fourth grade, I guess, since 1979. Went to Olathe South High School. Both my kids attend high school in Olathe now. My wife's a public school teacher. We were very, very concerned, obviously, about the future of Kansas, about the future of our public institutions, and about making sure that my kids, who I hope will choose to live in Kansas, have good jobs that are waiting for them when they're prepared for by the good education that they're getting. And fundamentally, in order to do that, we have to make sure we're asking the right questions. I feel like we're starting to do that in Kansas government, and I look forward to answering some questions here today to get into a little bit more detail about what I think some of the right answers are with respect to some of those important questions that I think finally now are being asked.
Views on economic development policy and Kansas' current toolbox of economic development agencies, programs, and incentives.
As my view on economic development in 3 words, it would be this: every business matters. And I think one of the things that we have not always done well with respect to economic development policy has been a focus either on particular industries or particular types of businesses that are provided incentives that oftentimes are not available to other businesses. You know, the business school over at the University of Kansas has done some really interesting work, and not too long ago they published a paper called Embracing Dynamism, the Next Phase for Economic Development in Kansas. And it's a really interesting paper. It's quite detailed, and I would commend it to all of you. It's easily available on the internet. And they take a look at the whole package of economic development programs that we have in Kansas, try to do some evaluation of which ones are working well, which ones aren't working so well. But the core point that they make, and it's one that I truly believe in, is that our focus in economic development in Kansas has been too industry specific, too focused on incentivizing particular big businesses to come to Kansas, and not focused enough on the idea that we need an overall platform that involves a tax and regulatory structure that encourages every business to want to come to Kansas and work here. And so my focus again would be not big economic incentive programs for the few where we're picking winners and losers, but an every business matters philosophy.
A two-part question here. As you know, education in Johnson County has been a cornerstone for our economic growth and prosperity. What are your views on the current state of K-12 education funding in Kansas, and how should the legislature proceed on this issue, and will you support vouchers?
Okay, sure. First of all, the education finance formula in Kansas is broken, and it's been broken more or less since the early 90s. It got worse, quite frankly, after the change in school finance in 2005 coming out of the Montoy opinion. It was interesting. I was in the legislature at that time, and there were a lot of folks who were in favor of, who really liked the court opinion, folks from Johnson County. And then when we got to voting on the actual package that came out of Montoy, the Johnson County delegation in the House was all voting no. And there were some good reasons for that. That system was just an extension of a broken system in '92 that is unfair to Johnson County schools. Olathe, quite frankly, is in a little bit better position than some of the other school districts because it's a big school district that's getting larger. The worst situation in the state, the school district that has the most claim for inequity, is in fact Shawnee Mission, a big school district that's getting smaller, is it has real disincentives under the existing structure. So the bottom line is that the system is broken. What I would say in regard to that is that lots of legislators talk about that. I've done more than talk about it. I have repeatedly carried on the floor of the Kansas House specific proposals to provide more local authority to reform the school finance formula, and I've got maybe 15 seconds here, and with that I'll say I have introduced and proposed a voucher program for special ed kids, similar to the McKay Scholarship Program that exists in Florida. I think that would be a good thing for Kansas students. It wouldn't hurt the education system. I would like to see us do special ed vouchers.
3, and talking about our global economy and this business marketplace. As we know, it's challenging businesses to remain competitive and trying to survive. What are your views on proposals that may impact businesses' flexibility, such as wages, benefit mandates, or penalties for outsourcing jobs overseas? And Representative Morley, we'll start with you.
Proposals for, say, a living wage proposals or legislation that might be proposed to actually penalize businesses based upon decisions that they would make with respect to the types of benefits they wish to provide their employees, where they wish employees to be employed, and I oppose all of that. I've voted against proposals in the House that would have implemented living wage in a variety of contexts, and actually have supported some proposals that would actually stop local units of government. Because I think living wage legislation is extremely unfriendly to business, especially small business, and it's not something that I would support. In terms of the issue of having penalties on businesses that would choose to locate, say, overseas or elsewhere, obviously, given the federal government's purview in the regulation of interstate commerce, the ability of the state to interact with that issue is going to be limited. But as a general matter of principle, I think what we should be doing in Kansas is trying to make sure that we have the best tax and regulatory system we possibly can to incentivize businesses wanting to come here. Certainly don't have any interest at all in legislation that penalizes businesses based upon their decision to locate in a particular area or not locate in a particular area, or based upon the benefit packages or wage structure that they provide their employees. Those are decisions that private businesses, based upon the interests of the owners and the shareholders, have to make, and government shouldn't be intruding in those areas.
Going from global now to back to state, what are your views on the current state tax policy? Representative Kinzer, we'll go to you.
Sure. Well, I'm tremendously excited, and one of those areas of difference between myself and Representative Worley is tax policy. He mentioned that he voted for the 18% sales tax increase, the second largest tax increase in Kansas history. I voted no. We also voted differently on the recent income tax cut that recently passed the Kansas legislature. Not only did I vote for that particular package, but I made the crucial motions on the House floor to advance the bill through the process. And I think, and the feedback I'm receiving, particularly from small business owners with respect to what the impact of this tax cut is going to be, is tremendous. I can't tell you the number of folks who have approached me, small business owners, who are talking about what the tax relief provided in this package will allow them to do with respect to hiring, with respect to growing their businesses, with respect to reinvesting in the Kansas economy. And so I think we took a tremendous step forward. The tax bill this year provides tax relief across the brackets to all Kansas income tax paying families. But most important, it recognizes what I think is absolutely crucial, that small businesses in particular are the job engine in Kansas, and that we absolutely have to incentivize small business activity in Kansas. I hope we get a question that allows us to talk a little bit about, because I've only got a couple seconds left here, about why tax relief in Kansas in particular is so important when you look at just the dreadful public-private sector job growth and productivity growth numbers in Kansas over the last quarter century. But I'm excited about our changes in tax policy.
Next question. Another important topic in recent legislative sessions has been illegal immigration. How do you believe Kansas should proceed, if at all, on this particular issue?
One of the things that I've experienced over and over again as I'm out knocking on doors and talking to constituents is coming across folks in skilled trades, sometimes just laborers who are employees of or who own small businesses. And repeatedly, what I'm told, especially by the owners of small contracting businesses, is that they are being undercut over and over again and placed in real jeopardy because we have people who are working who, frankly, the illegal aliens themselves are being abused by the process by many of these employers. But failure of enforcement at the federal level has real consequences for real Kansas businesses. It's a job killer with respect to many of the businesses in Kansas that I think we all want to promote and support. Small contracting firms, people who are out on their own trying to provide for their family, and those folks simply cannot compete in a market where there are people who are unscrupulous, who are willing to hire people who are here illegally. We've got a big difference on this issue. I think the state does have a role, an appropriate role. We have some good sense of what the limits are to that role based upon some recent Supreme Court opinions, but we shouldn't be incentivizing illegal behavior. Unlike my opponent, I don't think we should be providing in-state tuition to people who lack lawful status, and I think at least state government should be using the E-Verify system to see to it that we're not hiring people who are here unlawfully. All the surrounding states do it. Kansas doesn't. I think it's a shame.
The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the federal health reform law that requires states to either implement their own state exchange for selling health insurance or to use a federally designed exchange. Do you support the passage of a state exchange in Kansas?
You know, that's a great question, and it's a bit of a difficult one because it involves a balance, and that balance is essentially this. In looking at the regs that have been promulgated by HHS, could Kansas realistically, under those constraints, adopt an exchange that would be enough preferable to provide enough additional flexibility for Kansans beyond what will be provided if we have a federally created exchange to make it worthwhile, to make it worth the investment potentially of tens of millions of dollars to build a state exchange? My answer, based upon the information that I have at this time, is no. That if you look at the regs, and I can't claim to have read every word of the thousands of pages of regs associated with the HHS, that HHS has promulgated, but I have attended some interesting presentations on the issue with respect to what are the requirements that are going to have to be included in an exchange if implemented. In my view, based upon the information that I have as I sit here today, is that we will not be able to get a substantially better product by having a state exchange because we'll be so constrained by the regulations that the feds are going to impose. And so to invest state dollars in building an exchange that's not going to benefit Kansas in terms of allowing us more flexibility doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. If, as we move down the line, it turns out that the regs are changed in some way so that it would be possible at the state level to develop an exchange that could be shown to be dramatically better than the exchange that would be implemented by the feds, then I think we take another look at it. But that's not my understanding of the facts on the ground at the moment.
This next question is dealing with T-Works. Do you support fully funding of T-Works, the state's 10-year comprehensive transportation program, including the 4/10 of the state sales tax? And when you support or oppose the diversion of designated state highway funds?
Well, anybody who lives in Johnson County and has their eyes open understands how crucial transportation is to this community, and so there's no question there. In 2012, I voted against a budget that took $200 million from the state transportation fund and used it for general fund purposes. My opponent voted for that budget. The reality is that we've been using the state transportation fund as a cash cow for a decade. In fact, I was looking at some data somewhat recently, and to make sure I don't get it wrong here, I want to cite this correctly, but since the FY 2000 budget, we've taken $1.5 billion out of the state transportation fund and used it for other purposes. $125 million of that was supposed to be considered a loan. $63 million of that got paid off, and the balance of that got forgiven, written off. And so the question is this. We've put a lot of money into transportation. I'm looking at a sheet right now that has the ending balances of all the various transportation funds going back to 2002 in front of us, and we've had ending balances anywhere from $825 million one year. I guess it was as low as $360 million, but we've had massive ending balances in our transportation funds. We've borrowed over $1 billion from it over the past decade, and the question is, we have a transportation system. Oh, I've got to stop now.
Well, we'll lead off with you on this question.
Okay.
Kinzer. And some legislators have proposed broadening the state sales tax base by eliminating some existing exemptions or extending sales tax to transactions not currently taxed. What are your views on this issue, and specifically the possible imposition of sales tax on professional services such as architects, lawyers, engineers, doctors?
I think it's mine. Yeah, somebody throw something at me if this is out of order. But just to finish up my last answer, I was just going to say that one of the things I think the new secretary really needs to look at is what is it structurally within KDOT that is allowing us to carry these huge ending balances, to have it be this cash cow for borrowing? Why isn't this money getting used on programs that we need to be completed? And I think the current secretary is looking carefully at that issue, and it's an important one. I am not in favor of a sales tax on services. For Johnson County, that would be a disaster, quite frankly. Having incentivized small businesses to come to Kansas, with what I think is a great tax package that just got passed, to turn around and then impose a sales tax on services, which would drive all kinds of businesses over the state line, to me makes no sense whatsoever. So is there room for looking at some sales tax exemptions and whether they make sense? Yes, absolutely, but a sales tax on services is not something I could envision supporting under just about any scenario I can imagine.
I either want you to enter this next one in 90 seconds. Give it a try. The future holds many challenges for Kansas, and the legislature will need strong leadership to help guide our state through this difficult time. Please tell us what you believe are the most critical issues facing Kansas legislature right now, and what represents strong leadership to you.
The most pressing issue, given the work that was done on CAPERS this year, given tax reform that was passed, is to take on the next big issue, K-12 education reform, and we've talked a little bit about it already. I think the governor's initial proposal, while it didn't get a lot of traction, was a good starting point. It had some elements in it that I think would be very helpful to Johnson County, particularly with respect to local control. One of the things I was pleased to see this year in our debate on the House side was that we actually did get sufficient votes on the House floor for the first time since I've been there to pass a significant local funding provision. Now, it died in the Senate, and I think there was a tactical reason for that. While it is true, and I don't disagree with the fact that more money into the base is probably going to have to be part of the overall solution in order to get votes, I think as long as folks in outstate Kansas believe that Johnson County legislators and other suburban legislators will vote over and over and over again for money in the base, which frankly is a pittance for our school districts, without getting real substantive school finance reform in exchange, they have no incentive to come to the table and negotiate with us. That's why I thought it was foolhardy for us to take some of the votes that we took in the House in the order in which we took them. I voted for the budget that put $50 million into the base, and ultimately in conference it was $40 million, and that's what we wound up with. And that's a whole other crazy story about how the Senate passed 70, we passed 50, and it wound up at 40. But the bottom line is, for Johnson County, we have to get reform.
And we will rotate and start off with Representative Kinzer. What is the most important thing that distinguishes you from your primary opponent in this race?
Well, the differences are really on the issues. Look, and I hope Representative Worley would say the same thing. I like Representative Worley very much at a personal level. He is a good man. We've always gotten along, I think, quite well and have been very cordial, but we haven't always seen eye to eye on the issues. We've talked about a few of those here today. When it comes to fiscal policy, there's simply no question, and the votes show it. I've voted for smaller budgets. He's voted for larger budgets. On taxes, I voted to cut taxes and against raising them. He's voted the opposite. We talked about immigration a little bit. There's a distinction there. On social issues, there have been significant differences on votes. And so we just have a different vision when it comes to Kansas. I do think that leadership is a difference as well. From my second year in the legislature, I was appointed to be vice chair of the Judiciary Committee, and each year thereafter have moved to greater positions of responsibility and have been gratified that I've been given those positions. I think what that's allowed me to do, and I think the reason I've been entrusted with some of those responsibilities, is that I've shown a consistent ability to move legislation through the process. And yes, some of the issues that I'm involved in are big headline-grabbing issues, but other ones are really small issues. Things like reform of a fire district in Olathe for some citizens there. Small things that I was able to actually take from start to finish through the process and actually get something done. And so I think the thing that I've shown over time, there are issue differences, but I've shown leadership, the ability to effectively work with legislators to move legislation through the process, and hope I'll have a chance to continue to do that. Well, I would join in the thanks to the chambers and those who took the time to attend here today. I certainly appreciate it, and obviously there are some differences between Representative Worley and I. I had a chance to play small-time college football, which was a great experience, and my coach would always tell us, and he was a very good man, a funny man, and he would always tell us, men, I've got one rule. You know the difference between right and wrong, do right. And that rule actually is a pretty good one to live by. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to know what's right and what's wrong in a given situation, but an awful lot of the time it's pretty clear what the right thing to do and what the wrong thing to do is. And I think we've got so much opportunity over the next couple of years to do what's right for Kansas in a whole host of areas. One of those that I've talked about here that means a lot to me is the issue of K-12 school finance reform. I mentioned I went to public school in Johnson County. Both my kids are public school students. My wife and brother both teach in the school district. My father's even a public school employee now in his retirement job. Our whole life, every day, is bound to orchestra concerts and Friday night football games and parent-teacher conferences and open houses. I care passionately about this issue. And I think at the end of the day, the difference is not so much, because I think most Johnson County legislators on balance understand or smart enough to figure out some of the reforms that need to be made. But the difference, I think, is who is going to have the leadership, who is going to have the relationship, frankly, with other members of the Kansas House. And we need votes from very conservative rural members in order to pass school finance reform that's going to be good for Johnson County. And my sincere belief is that my background, my experience, my concern about this issue, and the relationships that I have on a philosophical and personal level with other legislators who share my basic perspective, is going to allow me to take a leadership role in moving forward, working with the governor to try to achieve a goal that I think would make a huge difference for Johnson County going forward. We have to get this right. We have to get this fixed. And I fundamentally believe that I'm in a better posture to lead on that issue for a whole host of reasons than Representative Worley is. I want to close by saying that it's been a tremendous honor to serve for 8 years. In fact, it's almost 8 years to the day that I was appointed to the Kansas legislature and then ran. And over that period of time, I've learned to have tremendous respect for the good that government can do, but I've also learned to be wary of our tendency to paint the same circles over and over again. I hope what I bring is a respect for the important role of government, but a willingness to ask hard questions about the way in which government has functioned, and then to provide practical solutions to those problems. And I sincerely hope I'll be given the opportunity to continue to try to do that for another 2 years. So thank you all very much.